Okay, so this is a quick PowerPoint to give you a little bit more review of inductive and deductive reasoning. Um, First off, inductive reasoning is an argument that starts with the facts or observations and then uses them to draw the final conclusion. It rests on the details that then accumulate for its support. In this type of argument, the final claim, usually comes after all of the evidence is presented. This is like that FDR speech that we looked at, where FDR presented all of his evidence for why Japan was vile and did all these horrible things to us, and he used that as support for his final conclusion, which was that we should go to war with Japan. Here's an example. Okay, so we have some evidence. 75% of senior students surveyed do not favor wearing uniforms. 82% of junior students also don't favor wearing uniforms. Our data suggests that a majority of upperclassmen do not favor uniforms. All of that evidence works towards the broader conclusion, therefore, we should not adopt school uniforms. That is inductive reasoning. It's working from the evidence first to reach the conclusion. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, starts with a generalization, something we know, a big idea or commonplace, and then it applies it to specific instances to draw a conclusion. It uses the commonplace to come to conclusions about specific information or situations. You take that commonly accepted value or belief, and then that prepares the way for the argument that will be made, as opposed to presenting a whole bunch of evidence first. So, in deductive reasoning, we start with the commonplace. Teenagers need to express their individuality. That's a general belief. We work our way towards a final point by narrowing it just a little bit. Okay, so they need to express their individuality. One way to express individuality is through choice of clothing. Okay, teenagers need to be able to choose the clothes that they wear in order to assert that individuality. So therefore, final conclusion, very narrow, we should not adopt school uniforms. We've come to the exact same conclusion as the previous argument, but we've gone about it in different ways. Here we've started from the big idea of expressing individuality, whereas in the other instance, we looked at the data of what students wanted to come to the same conclusion. Here's two examples. We can see them side by side. So our first example, Joe, he says, I've noticed previously that every time I kick a ball up, it comes back down. So I guess this next time when I kick it up, it's going to come back down too. Joe looks at examples. He noticed every time he's done this, this has happened. So based on that evidence, he comes to a conclusion. Tom, on the other hand, uses deductive reasoning. Tom says, I know Newton's law. According to Newton's law, everything that goes up must come down. So if I kick the ball up, it must come back down. They come to the exact same conclusion, but they use a different setup for their argument. Joe uses evidence for inductive reasoning. Tom uses a commonplace or general principle of Newton's law to use deductive reasoning. Tom's deductive reasoning argues from the law of gravity. His argument is clearly from the general, the law of gravity, to the specific, this particular kick. He applies that commonplace to make a prediction about what the ball will do. Joe, on the other hand, uses inductive reasoning. He argues from his observation. His argument is from the specific, the individual instances that he's observing, to the general. The same thing is going to happen the next time that he does it. He applies the examples as evidence to make the prediction that the ball will come down. Again, they come to the same conclusion, but they go at it from different ways. It's important to understand that any inductive argument can also be expressed deductively. Any deductive argument can also be expressed inductively. But even so, it's important to recognize what form of argument is being used here, because each requires different sorts of support. So the support being used, in Joe's inductive argument above, it's supported by his observations. Tom's deductive argument is supported by his reference to the law of gravity. So Joe could provide additional support for his inductive argument by detailing those observations. He wouldn't have to reference any books or theories of physics at all. He wouldn't have to know the big picture idea. Tom could provide additional support by discussing Newton's law, even if Tom himself had never seen a ball kicked. He wouldn't need all of that evidence because he's working from the commonplace. And that is a quick overview of inductive versus deductive reasoning. I know the book goes into a lot of detail, and it can be really confusing. These are the basics. As long as you understand the basic setup of each type of argument for the purposes of our class, you will do just fine.